Hello, everybody. Welcome to my new show called Binge Knitting. On this show, I will talk about shows that I binge, usually on Netflix, Hulu, whatever, Amazon, as I knit. All right, so let's get started. This week, I binged on The Haunting of Hill House. So I'm going to talk about non-spoilers, and then we're going to get into spoilers towards the middle of this episode. So let's get started. So, The Haunting of Hill House is about a family navigating grief, mental illness, and the paranormal all at once. It reminds me of the Babadook, which is another horror film which discusses grief and how ghosts can just be a form of our grief. And the Babadook to me is like the smallest stepchild to Hill House. Just because I feel like if Babadook had more money, had bigger funding, had that Netflix funding, it would be just as good as Hill House, just on how it deals with grief. I also recommend, if you haven't already been corrupted by YouTube reviews or by Twitter and everything like that, I recommend that you watch this show without knowing much. That's how I watched it. I tend to live underneath a rock when I'm not working. So when I hit play on Hill House, I just thought I was going to watch a scary film. That's it. I did not think I would have all my pearls clutched. It was an awakening. Also, something to keep in mind is that Hill House is very dark and very scary. Not because of conventional horror movie scares, but because of its realism. You can actually see yourself, see your family in this film. And that to me is what makes it horrifying. As humans, we have all lost, we have all grief, we have all tried to move past grief, sometimes in unhealthy ways. And because it's taking a subject such as mental illness as well, which is very relatable to most people, whether you're suffering from it or you know someone suffering from it, chances are your life has been touched by mental illness, one way or another. Just the fact on how relatable it is what makes it horrifying. It's what makes it even more real. So for me, that's what horrified me the most as I watched it. Because there's very little jump scares. You know, there's some gore, but it's not overwhelmingly gory. It's just one of those movies or shows that after you're done watching it, you're just constantly looking behind the shower curtain. Like today I took a shower and I literally had to keep the curtain closed or else completely shut. You know, sometimes there's a little gap. I saw something glisten off the doorknob in my bathroom this morning and I was shooketh. I was done. I was deceased. That shower was cut short. And it's just one of those shows that just stick with you. And that's why you see some people talking about it. Please watch it. It's on Netflix. The whole season is up. It's amazing. It's perfect knitting watching. Just keep in mind, if you're knitting, knit something that is pretty easy because you will be distracted. You might not get a lot of knitting done because I was distracted. So anyway, on to the spoilers and the analysis. So if you haven't seen it or you don't want it spoiled, turn off this right now, finish the series, and then come back so we can talk about it. I'll wait. All right, you ready? Spoilers. No turning back. Okay, I got my notebook down here. So if you see me looking down, look at all these notes. I watched so many analyses videos, but I'm just still, there's so much that we need to discuss. One thing that I want to start with is the theme of mothers in The Haunting of Hill House. For those who don't know, I am currently grieving. I had a miscarriage a few months ago, and I am still grieving from it. So I see myself as a mother. I gave birth. I am a mother. And I just really resonated with all of the mothers in this series. I did. And I found there are two different types of mothers. There's a dichotomy when it comes to motherhood. There is that overprotective mother, and then there's the grounded, worldly mother. So my overprotective mothers are Poppy, Olivia, and Mrs. Dudley. And my more grounded, worldly mothers are Aunt Janet and Shirley. So let's talk about Poppy, because she could be the most disputed, whether or not she is a protective mother or if she's just putting on this front just to relate to Olivia to drive her to murder her children. Oh, horrifying. So, one thing about Poppy is that she is, when we're first introduced to her character, and when she first starts telling us her story, well, she's telling Olivia, she talks to Olivia about protecting her children. You must keep them as they are now. And then she talks about how she lost her own two children. And Olivia takes this to heart. And she takes this to heart for many reasons. One, later on in the series, Hugh explains to his oldest son, I want to call him Andrew, but his name isn't Andrew, Stephen. Andrew. He explains to Stephen that his mother's a kite and Hugh is the line. So he keeps his mother grounded. And so there is talk about Olivia being spiritual, being a little bit of a medium tendencies, but she is also mentally ill. She also has some type of undiagnosed mental illness. And people are still going back and forth whether or not they really are mediums, clairvoyant, I should say, or if they're just suffering from a mental illness. I see evidence of both of those things being true. Just based upon Nell's manic tendencies, and based upon Theo's abilities, are pretty solid abilities she got there. So there's obviously something going on there. But because of Olivia's ancestry of being clairvoyant, and also because of her being very likely having a mental illness that's left untreated, and being under the stress of flipping this impossibly flippable house, almost, she begins to unravel. And she begins to not be able to tell what is real and what is fake. And the house feeds into this. Poppy feeds this. And that's why Olivia is able to turn this switch into overly bearing, protective mother. She wasn't really like that in the beginning. Most of the time in the beginning of the film, the children are just entertaining themselves. She is not being overbearing. She'll give them rules and guidelines, but she's not that overbearing, I watch you sleep at night mom, until Poppy really gets to her. And that's when it just switches, when she becomes uber protective mother Olivia. Let me give you rat poison tea party Olivia. Oh, terrifying. This is so scary to me. And she becomes that overbearing mother where it's like she would rather her kittens, as she called them, not feel any pain. Which is starkly different from the mother that we meet in the beginning, who tries to give her children a very healthy outlook when it comes to death. And we see that with Shirley in the kitten tragedy. She tries really hard to make it a normalized experience, but the mental illness, the seeing of the bugs, and the house playing tricks on them kind of makes that whole situation go awry. So Poppy is a protective mother. At least she is portrayed as that. That can just be her crazy manipulative self feeding into Olivia's fears when it comes to protecting her children. But the fact that she talks about it with so much heart and so much understanding, and how she clings to Olivia, just makes me feel like there is some protective mothering happening there. Whether it's exactly as she says it is, or if it's revealed to be something different in later episodes. Another protective mother, and this is what really sealed the deal with me to take Poppy's claim seriously, was Mrs. Dudley, who says the same thing as Poppy does to Olivia about keeping her children safe from the world, keeping them unhurt from the world. And that, to me, that just stuck with me, that these three women from three different worlds, Poppy from the 20s, Olivia from current, 80s, 90s, Olivia, and then Mrs. Dudley, who just lives her life in her own realm almost, dedicated to this house, lives outside of society. How they all have this same core belief of they must smuggle their children with love. And then we move on to the stable mothers. We move on to Aunt Janet and Shirley. Aunt Janet, we don't know much about her mothering skills. I do see her as a mother to Luke and Nell specifically, just because they were so young when they went into her care, and just the way Luke greets her at the funeral. It's very clear that he sees her as his mother, and it's later revealed that he remembers not too much about his mom. He knows what she looks like later when he sees apparitions of her, but he doesn't remember much, which is quite sad. But it's clear that Aunt Janet was stable. She's very matronly, motherly, I should say, not matronly, motherly. And we could tell that she's stable when we meet her at the funeral. And she just has a very grounded perspective of it all. She seems to say a lot without actually saying it, if that makes sense. And if you rewatch that scene, you'll get what I mean. And we also can tell that she's grounded because when Olivia is going through her unstable dreamlike phases where she's not sure when she's awake or dreaming, Hugh recommends she go sees her sister, as if her sister is like him, where she's grounded enough to take care of her and just give her a break. I doubt he would send her to Aunt Janet's if she was just as flighty as Olivia. And then the other stable mother is Shirley. And we see her stability at its peak when she explains death to her children after her children try to peek into the embalming process of their aunt. No. And even though we learn later that she is following a script that child psychiatrist Theo gave her, when they would ask about it, Theo gave her some really solid advice on how to handle death with children. But Shirley is grounded enough and stable enough to go through with it. And Shirley also just has this whole perspective on death that everyone in the family lacks. She has a more realistic approach to death, a more final approach to death. And this all really stemmed from her mother's wake years and years ago. And then when she became a mortician, yes, a mortician, that's when her understanding of death really just blossomed. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm still trying to make out why there is such a sharp dichotomy between different mothers in the series. Why do we have these overprotective mothers and then these worldly mothers? But then when it comes to fathers, we tend to get the same deal. We tend to get a disconnected, emotionally disconnected father who is very grounded, really based in the realistic aspect of the world, unlike the mothers, not just the mothers in that are descended from Olivia, but just mothers in general, like Poppy and Mrs. Dudley, who are very different walks of life. Doesn't make sense to me. Well, it makes sense, but it's just, I just find it fascinating that then we have fathers like Hugh, who are very emotionally detached from his children when they're younger and when they're adults. And then we have Stephen, who is so emotionally detached from having children that he gets a vasectomy at a very young age. And then we have Mr. Dudley, who, we hardly see him with his wife because he's always working with Hugh, but their relationship just seems very emotionally distant, especially when Miss Dudley talks about protecting her children and keeping them at home and making sure that she's home every night for them, and saying things like, your husband might be mad at you, your husband will not agree with you, but just know it's right. That resonated with me, that I would not be surprised if the Dudley household had a very similar dynamic as as Olivia's household when it comes to an overbearingly possessive, protective mother versus a more grounded, worldly, yet emotionally disconnected father. So that's just something about mothers. And then one thing while we're talking about Poppy's relationship to Olivia, let's talk about the Red Room. And how does that correspond with Poppy's relationship with Olivia? All right, get ready for your mind to be blown. Okay, I've yet to see this anywhere else, so maybe I just misinterpreted it, but listen up. Y'all, if you're listening, then you already know about the Red Room, about how it changes to fit the needs of the Crane's children and Olivia's own personal need. So for Theo, it's a video dancing room, whatever. For Steven, it's a video game room. For Luke, it's a tree house. And for Nell, it's her toy room. And then I think Shirley, it's her family room. So they all got their own different rooms, right? Oh, and then Olivia, it's her it's her reading room. You know what's funny? Poppy has a room. For Poppy, it's her children's room. And how are they both in the Red Room if the Red Room has always been the stomach of the house? And the way the Red Room works, it seems to be only that very rarely are two people ever in the Red Room together unless there's something really significant happening, with the exception of Stephen and Luke sharing it as the treehouse. And it's always established to be like Luke's place, but Stephen walks in on it many times. It's very rare to see two actual people in there. Makes me realize that that's Poppy's room. That was never her children's room. That's Poppy's place. That's Poppy's version of the Red Room. And we come to realize that when Olivia shows Poppy her reading room, and Poppy just instantly says, I love what you did with it. And as a viewer, I first thought, well, you know, of course it looks different. Olivia added furniture and moved things around. No, they were renovating a house. They're not moving things around. They're not putting books on a bookcase. They're not adding all this stuff to the house. Because all that stuff isn't there. It's just an empty, barren room. But the house fills it with what Olivia needs in order to keep her there to be digested. But what I'm trying to say is that when Poppy talks about the changes that Olivia made to the room, she is really saying, man, I like what your red room looks like. I like what you did to it. My red room was my children's beds. My red room was me being with my babies one last time. That was her red room. That just fascinated me so much that Poppy the ghost had a red room. And at the time when she's talking to Olivia about it, she is very aware of the room's capabilities, but she keeps it from Olivia. Why? Possibly to feed her craziness, feed her unraveling, so that way she can feed the house in turn. But I don't understand Poppy's true motive to it, and they don't really go into it. Hopefully next season they will go into why the house needs to feed on souls and why Poppy is the only ghost to assist the house, beyond the fact that she is not that she is also suffering from mental illness. They don't really go into straight detail, and I just know it's because of they're gonna go into it very soon. Probably next season. So that just really got me. And another thing I don't get with the red room is besides the fact that Poppy has her own version of the red room, that gives me the chills. I just don't understand how the door opens. Please, someone help me out with this. So, in episode 10 or 9, I want to say it's 10, when Hugh and Hugh and Stephen return to the house and they're banging on the red door to the red room. They are unable to enter, and Hugh and Stephen bang on at the same time. Hugh bounces back into the hall and falls over, and he says, maybe it's because there's two of us. Something like that. There's two of us. As soon as he says that, the door opens. Stephen walks in. Door shuts. And then that just makes us, as viewers, remember, almost every time someone entered that room, we never really see them enter it. But every time they're in the room, they're by themselves. But one thing I just couldn't understand is that if that's so, then was Stephen able to enter the room when Luke was already using it as its treehouse? And B, why did Hugh act like he thought that only dead Olivia can open the door? Almost inferring that only the ghosts and spirits can open the door, which isn't true. And I just cannot come up with a solid idea of why Stephen is able to enter the room when it's Luke's treehouse and he has his own version of the red room, other than the fact that Stephen is very, very, very similar to his father. They make it clear with just how he likes to fix things like his father does. But he's also similar in how grounded he is. He is not nearly as grounded as his father just because he has his mother's traits in him where they can see things and they're just more sensitive, as the show calls it. But I wonder if it's the groundedness that gives him the ability to kind of like bend the rules of the house a little bit. Because Hugh is the only one that doesn't have a room. And it's clear why. He says at the end, he has this long soliloquy. Everyone seems to have a long soliloquy at the end, which to me was a little much, but I get it. I understand why. It was because of grief and how we kind of need all this colorful language to navigate grief, and how we need poetry to speak about grief, because it's really hard to speak about it in such such a concrete way, because it's a very, very unconcrete thing. Anywho, they all seem to talk. Hugh was just talking about how he held that door closed from his children, figuratively, and how he did it to keep his family grounded and to keep them from falling into the trap of being smuggled by their mother's love, essentially. To keep them from her, to keep them from who she became towards the end, and to keep them from becoming ungrounded by the spirituality of the house. And this is all kind of very figurative way of speaking, because in reality, he was trying to open that door like mad, but he can never get it open because he didn't need it. He didn't need what the room had to offer. And at the same time, he was trying to prevent his children from needing it. But he did so in not the best way. Whew, that's a lot to unpack. But yeah, I just don't understand why Stephen has two virgins. The only way he's different from his siblings is that he is more susceptible to the house. And that's something that Hugh brings up later. That Stephen is more susceptible because he doesn't believe in the supernatural. So he's able to believe everything at face value when he enters the house. For example, he saw ghosts in the house, but he just thought they were supposed to be there. He saw what's it called when you take care of old watches? Horology? He saw a horologist or something. Is that what it's called? Don't make fun of me. At the house, wearing old-timey clothes. And I'll never forget when we first see this guy. And I'm like, that's not a real guy. That has to be a ghost. Like, I know it's the 80s, but that handlebar mustache and weird old-timey clothes. And he's fixing that old clock, okay? And I've listened to S-Town, all right? I know that not so random Joe off the street can fix a clock. So I was already aware of that when I watched it. And it's like, but he takes these ghosts at face value. Meanwhile, people like Nell and Luke and Theo, when they see the ghosts, they know that they're ghosts. They know. Part of them thinks that it might be a figment of their imagination, but deep down inside, even Shirley knows that those are ghosts. And because Stephen doesn't know that, he's more susceptible to the house. So maybe that's why he's able to enter Luke's version. But I don't understand why only Luke's. Maybe it's because they both needed the same thing. Maybe they both needed understanding and compassion from their father, which is something that they both struggled to get because their father is just so enveloped by the process of flipping the house that they almost needed a space created by their father for them. They needed it. And maybe that's why Luke and Stephen both had almost equal access to the treehouse. So that's one thing about the Red Room, or a few things about the Red Room, I should say. So that's a few things about the Red Room that really stood out to me. I'm just still trying to unpack a lot of it. There's a lot to unpack, specifically in episode 10, when they're all in the Red Room and they all experience guilt dreams from times in their life when they had guilt eat them alive. So there's a lot in the Red Room, and I don't understand why they had that inner room that's supposed to make them feel good as they're being digested. That was one thing I just didn't quite understand as well. I wouldn't be surprised if it has something to do with the whole grieving process. Because going back to the house, they are facing their grief. And in facing your grief, you're also facing your shame, and you're facing the things you feel guilty about, because guilt and grief are like this. So I just wonder if that's just part of it as well. If they're just, because they're going back to this home to face their grief, they are also facing their guilt. And Shirley mentions this a little bit when she thinks about the time where she cheated on her husband. And now, my final things I want to talk about Hill House is the two different Nells. I'm still trying to unpack this, so bear with me. I've noticed that after Nell passed away, there are two different Nells. And let me talk about the timeline here. I'm thinking of a linear timeline here, and I'm thinking about when Nell finally, when she committed suicide, and she finally becomes the bent neck lady. We see that there's two different versions of her. And I'm not talking about the Nell that appears to younger version of her. I am talking about the Nell that appears to her siblings, and even sometimes to the audience after her death. So I've noticed there are two different types of Nells. And I think the reason why there's two different types of Nells is because we see the Nell, we see anguish, angry ghost Nell, and we see peaceful, coming to terms, accepting ghost Nell. The peaceful, coming to terms, accepting ghost Nell looks more like Nell after she's been deceased for maybe an hour. She's a little decomposed looking, a little gray, a little pasty, a little gruesome looking, but she still looks like Nell. And then the anguish, angry Nell is a Nell with the neck like this, and it's absolutely terrifying. And we see her in the background of during a shot in the funeral home when they are having a private showing of the body with the siblings and with Douglas. Not Douglas. Who's Douglas? With the siblings and Hugh. And we see her with that crooked neck, looking menacing, looking like an angry ghost, upset. And of course she's upset because she's watching her family unravel. And then later on in the series, we see a different type of undead Nell. We see her looking more like how we see Ghost Olivia looking, where you could clearly see that she's not quite all right, but she still looks more like herself. Almost looks like she got fixed by a mortician before appearing. And this is the Nell that we see a lot in episode 10, and I think even 9, when she's pulling people out, when she's pulling her siblings out of their guilt dreams, or guilt trips. Guilt trips, because they're on trips where they feel guilty. I'm here all day. Anyway, she pulls them out of their guilt trips, and sorry. And she looks more like Nell when she's talking to Luke, when he says, I don't know how I can live without you, something like that, yada, yada, yada. She looks more like herself. And it is this Nell where we can see her speaking very eloquently about time and space and being undead and grief and guilt. And this is the Nell that understands everything that's happening around her. She has becoming more knowing. Once she saw herself haunting herself, and it seems to be once she got over that initial holy crap, and she started to see what was going on around her, and started to see things in different time periods, in different times, and becoming more aware and wiser, she becomes a completely different Nell. A more aware and peaceful ghost now. More accepting ghost now. And that's just something that, as I was watching, I couldn't understand why were there two different Nells. And I realized because there are two different Nells. There's the anguish ghost Nell, and then there's the peaceful Nell. Does So if you have any things to talk about and discuss, anything you disagree with, agree with, please put in the comments. I'm going to stop there before this turns to like a 1 hour analysis. I might talk more about this with my husband after I force him to watch it later on tonight. And I will catch you all later. Thanks for binge knitting with me. Bye.